Before the sun kisses the dusty floor of the arena, before cheers rise and blades clash, there is a quiet breath, a ritual, a heartbeat beneath the armor. Today, we walk in the sandals of a Roman gladiator, not in battle, but in the calm moments between survival and spectacle. Close your eyes, let the roar fade, and listen to the day behind the shield. The world was still when the first shafts of dawn slipped through the slats of the barracks. Dust hung in the air like ancient breath, and a faint scent of sweat, leather, and old iron filled the stone walls of the ludus, the gladiator training school. Marcus, once a fisherman's son, now a Lannister's prized asset, stirred awake on his straw-stuffed mat. Around him, dozens of other men lay quiet in their own sleep, their bodies scarred and muscled from months, sometimes years, of combat drills. The wooden bunks creaked as he rose, muscles aching from yesterday's sparring. He could already hear faint footsteps above, the doctor, their trainer, always awake before the men, patrolling like a wolf among restless cubs. It wasn't just discipline that got Marcus up, it was habit. In this place, you rose early, or you were beaten to it, by time, by fists, or by fate. He ran a calloused hand across his jaw, still bruised from a training blow the day before. No one spoke. This early, words came later, after the sweat. He stepped into the corridor. The ludus, though enclosed like a prison, had a pulse. One felt in the early flickers of firelight and the rhythmic clang of a hammer in the forge. Morning was for strengthening the body, but the earliest hour was for clearing the mind. In the small stone alcove near the washing basin, Marcus dipped a cloth into a wooden bucket and wiped the sleep from his face. Cold water jolted his senses. From the training yard, the scent of olive oil and crushed herbs drifted, likely rubbed into limbs the night before to soothe pain. He wasn't alone. A fellow fighter, Darius, stood leaning against the column just ahead, adjusting the straps on his sandals. A nod passed between them, silent, respectful. In the ludus, every nod meant something. A greeting, a warning, a memory of shared blood spilled on the sand. Just beyond the barracks, the peristyle, a square courtyard surrounded by columns, began to warm in the sunrise. It was where the men stretched, practiced their forms, and sometimes offered prayers. Not to the gods necessarily, but to something. Strength, victory, survival. Most of them didn't believe in immortality, but they believed in making it through the day. Marcus walked barefoot across the training ground. The sand was cool, the kind packed from years of trampling feet and falling bodies. He ran through his basic drills, wide stances, shield blocks, sword arcs. Not real blades, of course, not yet. These were wooden ruders, practice swords. But even these had left scars. A whistle echoed from the high wall. The gatekeeper had risen. The city beyond, the noise of carts, the smell of bread baking, the hawking of fishmongers was still out of reach, but Marcus knew it was there. Life, just beyond the training yard. He rarely saw it. This was his world. The ludus, the sand, the sweat. Breakfast would come soon. A mix, the sweat, of barley porridge, sometimes mixed with honey and maybe a fig or two. Gladiators were fed well, not out of kindness, but investment. A lean, strong man drew bigger crowds. Behind the columns the doctor emerged, an older man with a bent nose and a voice like iron scraping stone. He gave no greetings, just pointed. Marcus and the others lined up, shoulder to shoulder. Today would be conditioning, endurance. Tomorrow might be swordplay or shield breaking. They never knew. But in that still morning light, before the commands began, there was a strange sense of peace. Even here, even in a place built on the edge of death, the body remembered its rhythms, and the mind, battered by repetition, found quiet. As the sun crept higher, catching the dull gleam of leather armor hung from pegs nearby, Marcus took one final breath before the day truly began. He was not a hero. He was not a killer by choice. He was a gladiator, shaped by Rome and sharpened by time. And this was only the beginning. The clang of the wooden gate echoed like thunder through the yard, and just like that, the morning stillness was broken. By now, the sun had climbed higher, casting clean golden light across the sand. Gladiators, some fresh recruits, others weathered veterans, filed into the center of the yard as the doctor barked orders. But before the real training began, came the ritual that grounded the body: food. A young slave with a clay pot led the way, followed by two others carrying wicker baskets of bread. A fourth man rolled a barrel of water toward the communal bench. The food was humble: barley porridge, crusty loaves baked earlier in the city, dried fruit, and once in a while, the gift of cheese. Gladiators needed strength, not delicacies. Marcus sat cross-legged beside Darius and two younger fighters, boys really, no more than 17. He watched as one of them, Lucio, examined his fingers, still swollen from yesterday's wooden sword blows. "You learn to tuck them in," Marcus said gently, cracking his own loaf open to find it hollow but warm. They ate in silence, save for the quiet murmur of birds nesting in the arches above. The ludus was not a place of endless shouting or rage. It was a factory of men being forged like blades. Quiet suffering, quiet meals, quiet thoughts. The porridge was warm but bland, its texture thick with grains. Marcus dipped a corner of his bread into it, letting the steam fog his face. This small comfort was more than he'd had as a boy on the coast. That life, boats, nets, salt wind, seemed centuries away. Once the bowls were scraped clean and the crumbs gathered in cloths, the day's training began. First, the bruises. A line of men stood at the edge of the yard, arms crossed or fingers twitching. These were the wounded, not broken enough to rest, but marked enough to be reminded. Purple swellings, wrapped knuckles, cracked ribs bound tight in linen. A slave with a bowl of tar, goose fat and herbs moved down the line, dabbing ointment where needed. Marcus stepped forward. His shoulder still throbbed from a blow taken the day before. He winced as the salve touched skin, then grunted his thanks. Next came the bronze. The armory room stood just beyond the courtyard. Inside, helmets hung from pegs, gleaming faintly in the dusty light. Breastplates lined the back wall, dented from 100 drills. Wooden weapons were hung neatly, each one carved for balance and precision. Each man was issued a ludus, a wooden training sword. Some were also handed shields, scutum, large and curved. Others were given smaller. Circular bucklers. It depended on their fighting class. Marcus, now being trained as a secutor, took the curved shield and short sword. His opponent today would be a retiarius, the net fighter. The pairs were drawn and called by name. Marcus squared off against Flavian, a man with sharp features and long limbs. He carried no shield, only a wooden trident and a mock net made of knotted rope. This was not a fight to the death, but it was no play either. The bruises they left would last days. The doctor stood between them. "Honor?" he said. "Speed. Eyes up," then stepped back. The two circled each other. Marcus feinted left, ducked under the net, and used his shield to push Flavian back. A dull thud followed as wood struck wood. Sand kicked up in arcs under their sandals. They fought like dancers, trained, fierce, and deliberate. But when the match ended, there was no victor's cry, only a short nod from the doctor, and the next pair was called forward. By midday, the men were slick with sweat, and the sun scorched down mercilessly. One of the young boys had fainted and was dragged to shade. Another sat, clutching his ankle, blinking back pain. The medicus would see to them later if the injuries went grave. Marcus wiped his face with a linen strip tied to his wrist. He stood near the edge of the yard, breathing in deep, steadying himself. Around him, the clang of wooden swords, the bark of commands, the shuffle of sandals. It was a symphony of struggle, repeated each day without end. And yet, there was strange order in it all. Rhythm. A pattern. The bread filled their stomachs. The bruises reminded them they were alive, and the bronze, the cold gleam of armor they might one day earn, offered a glimpse of glory that lay just beyond pain. This was the gladiator's way. Strength built not just in body, but in silence, scars, and repetition. By late morning, the sun had begun to lean west, softening its glare just enough to cast long, dusty shadows across the training yard. The air, still warm and dry, was tinged with the earthy smell of sweat, leather, and sand. Today was an arena day. Once a week, those being prepared for combat, either real or staged, were marched to the practice amphitheater, a smaller cousin to the great Colosseum. It was built within the walls of the ludus, but modeled after the real thing, oval, open to the sky, with tiered stone seating and a central floor of churned-up sand. Marcus stood in line with the others, hands behind his back as the doctor called out names. Pairs were assigned based on class: Murmillo versus Thrax, Retiarius versus Secutor, Hoplomachus versus Bestiarius. The matchups were meant to teach balance, not to favor one style, but to challenge it. Today, Marcus had been paired with Gaius, a younger but agile Thrax, one trained with curved daggers, and a small rectangular shield. A fast fighter, unpredictable. As they stepped into the arena's circle, a quiet hush fell over the others watching from the sidelines. There was no crowd here, no roaring of nobles or cries of Ave, just the occasional chirp of birds and the low creak of leather straps being adjusted. But in the silence, the arena still hummed with something ancient, something expectant. The sand beneath Marcus's feet was soft but firm, raked smooth by slaves that morning. Already it bore new footprints. Marks of footwork, traces of falls, trails of rolling bodies. He exhaled slowly, lifting his shield and leveling his wooden sword. The doctor raised his hand. Begin. No trumpet sounded. No gate was flung open. Just the two men circling each other with measured caution, eyes locked, breathing quiet. Gaius struck first, quick and low, aiming for Marcus's calf, but Marcus twisted, catching the blow on his shield's curve, then countering with a wide sweep of his own. Gaius darted back, nimble on his feet, sand puffing beneath each step. They clashed again. Short, sharp blows exchanged in flurries, each testing the other's rhythm. Gaius ducked a high strike and rolled to the side, springing up with the precision of someone. The older fighter adjusted, conserving energy. The match lasted nearly 10 minutes, far longer than most. When finally it was called, both men stood, panting but unbroken, their weapons lowered in mutual respect. No blood was spilled. Not today. A slave stepped forward and offered each a ladle of water from a ceramic jug. Marcus took it and drank deeply, feeling the coolness coat his throat like a balm. Beside him, Gaius grinned through cracked lips. "One day, they'll cheer for us," he said. Marcus gave a faint nod, though he knew better. The crowd didn't cheer for gladiators. They cheered for the show, for the moment steel met skin, for the drama of survival and defeat. The men behind the masks were forgotten the moment the sand drank their blood. Still, the arena was a teacher like no other. Later, as the sun began its descent and shadows lengthened across the walls, the day's final matches were called. A veteran Mamillo named Tiberius faced off against two new recruits at once, a test of his endurance and control. He moved like a bear, slow but deadly, knocking both young men off their feet with swift, brutal strikes. But even in that violence, there was form, a choreography of power. The sand told stories. It remembered every fall, every drag mark, every footprint that ended in stillness. To the untrained eye, it was chaos. But to those who lived it, it was poetry, written in bruises and grit. As the matches ended and men were dismissed, Marcus lingered for a moment longer at the edge of the ring. He looked down at the ground, the sand still warm underfoot. He reached down, letting a handful slip through his fingers. The arena, he thought, was where men were broken, or built, not by the crowd, not by the sword, but by the silence between each breath, by the sand beneath their feet. The afternoon light filtered through the high, narrow windows of the armament hall, soft and golden as it lit the rows of weapons, shields, and helmets neatly hung in their designated places. The room smelled of oil, leather, and iron, a scent Marcus had come to associate with duty more than war. This was the sacred chamber of the ludus, where gladiators came not just to prepare, but to transform from men into symbols. From Marcus into Mamillo. He stepped in slowly, letting his calloused fingertips brush the edge of a polished bronze helmet. The surface reflected his worn face, distorted slightly by the curve. A warrior's face, yes, but still recognizably his. Tired eyes, a strong nose once broken and poorly reset, a faint scar along his jaw. The helmet was heavy, even in his hands. It had been beaten into shape by the Faber Armorum, the weaponsmith who worked just beyond the practice yard. Each dent in its rounded form whispered of earlier matches. Not all were Marcus's. Some belonged to men who no longer stood beneath the sun. Today was Oath Day. At the end of every month, new recruits took their sacred vow. For veterans like Marcus, the ritual was quieter, but no less meaningful. It was a reminder of what they had sworn, to endure flame and steel, to accept death if fate demanded it, and to never turn from the fight. As Marcus fitted the helmet over his head, the world dimmed to a narrow slit of vision. The echoes of footsteps on stone became louder. The clink of iron rang closer. All sounds became enclosed, like distant thunder rolling inside a cave. He adjusted his manica, the thick armguard of linen and leather, then wrapped the leather grip of his gladius, his short sword aged and balanced, worn like a faithful companion. Its edge had been honed that morning. He checked the scabbard, ensuring it fastened tightly to the wide Balteus belt strapped across his waist. Then came the scutum, the broad, rectangular shield of wood, reinforced with bronze at the boss. When slung over his shoulder, it made his gait shift slightly to one side, just as it had since his first days. He moved with ritual care, the way a priest dons his robes before a ceremony. Across the chamber, a line of new novices, fresh recruits, stood waiting, younger and nervous. They wore only simple tunics and bore no weapons yet. One by one, they would step forward to swear the gladiator's oath before the Lannister, overseer of the school. Their hands would be raised, their words memorized: Yuri, Vinciri, Verberari, Ferocnicari, to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to die by the sword. Marcus still remembered the chill of his first oath, not from fear, but from certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. He gave the recruits a slight nod as he passed them. A few returned the gesture, their eyes wide beneath sweat-darkened brows. They were not yet warriors, but neither were they boys. In a far corner, Gaius was polishing the curved guard of his sword. His armor was lighter, designed for speed, but no less meaningful. When he looked up and saw Marcus, he smiled. "You look like a statue," he said, "one of those marble ones in the forum." Marcus grunted. "Statues don't bleed. Not unless they're made of meat," Gaius replied, and resumed his polishing. The two men would spar again tomorrow, maybe even fight side by side one day, if called to a real match. Real blood, real crowds, real consequence. Outside the armory, bells tolled once to signal the final meal was being prepared. Before Marcus left the chamber, he turned back once more and looked at the tools of his trade. Each piece had its weight, its balance, but together they gave more than protection. They gave identity. Without them, he was just another man. With them, he was a Murmillo, an armored dream conjured by the Roman crowd's desire for glory. And so, day after day, he strapped on that identity, not just to survive, but to matter. As the day began to wane and long shadows stretched across the dusty courtyard of the ludus, the clang of weapons slowly quieted. The air still smelled faintly of sweat, dust, and oil, but now another aroma began to rise. Bread baking, herbs simmering, roasted lentils steaming over charcoal. It was time for the evening meal, the cena, known among the men as the Feast of the Fighters. The mess hall wasn't ornate like a senator's triclinium, but it had its own sense of order and warmth. Rows of sturdy wooden tables lined the room, flanked by benches that had absorbed years of laughter, bruises, and quiet reflection. A simple fire flickered in the hearth. It didn't take much to warm the stone walls. The gladiators brought their own heat. Marcus, his armor now unstrapped and set aside, washed his face and hands with cool water from the cistern. His fingers trembled slightly from exertion, but the ritual soothed him. He patted his cheeks dry with a cloth and made his way into the hall. The first platters had already arrived. Slices of barley bread, still warm from the clay oven, were stacked beside bowls of boiled chickpeas and stewed lentils spiced with garlic and cumin. Jugs of watered wine were passed around, no strong vintages here, just enough to calm the body after a long day's trials. Gaius slid over to make room on the bench. "You missed the stew," he said, gesturing to a clay bowl nearly empty, except for a sliver of onion floating in broth. "Fastest. I've seen them serve it," Marcus smirked. "You always steal the best bits. Perks of being faster than you." A nearby group of new recruits sat stiffly, unsure of whether they were allowed to speak, laugh, or eat their fill. One of them, barely old enough to shave, was eyeing a dried fig but hesitant to take it. Marcus broke a piece from his bread and handed it over without a word. The boy blinked, then nodded silently, understanding that no rank or class mattered at the dinner table. Only the day's sweat and survival earned a seat. As the meal went on, the tone shifted. Laughter returned to the room, low and rolling like a tide. Jokes were traded in Latin, Greek, and rough dialects from Gaul, Africa, and Hispania. A Murmillo teased a retiarius for having no proper armor and all net. The retiarius retorted with a grin, "At least I don't fight with a barn door strapped to my arm." Someone began softly humming a song from the provinces, an old shepherd's tune that made Marcus's mind wander not to battlefields or roaring crowds, but to fields of olive trees, to sunset skies, to a quiet before life had been claimed by the arena. Tonight was not about glory or spectacle. Tonight was about restoration. One of the trainers came around with a bowl of dates, tossing a few to each man. "You'll need the energy," he said with a crooked grin. "Tomorrow, the Lannister watchers sparring again." A groan rippled through the benches, but Marcus didn't mind. He welcomed the rhythm. The fight, the food, the fire. In their predictability, there was peace. As the evening wore on, the flames dimmed, plates emptied, voices softened. Some men excused themselves to the dormitories, where straw mattresses awaited them. Others lingered, sipping the last of the wine or sharing quiet stories of lost families, former trades, or imagined futures. Gaius leaned back, staring at the rafters. "Think they'll match me against you again next month? Only if they want to sell more tickets," Marcus replied dryly. They shared a tired chuckle. By now, the night air had crept in through the windows, cool and briny from the nearby river. A draft rustled the torch flames. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once, then silence. Marcus finished the last bite of his bread, folded his cloth napkin, and rose. He gave a final glance at the flickering hearth and the circle of tired, scarred faces, bathed in orange light. No one else in Rome knew what this life felt like. Not truly. But here, among these men, it was understood. The feast was over. The battles would return. But for tonight, they were simply men, fed, warmed, and briefly whole. Long before the sun crested over the tiled rooftops of Rome, the ludus stirred. In the still grey hush of early morning, when even the city's pigeons had yet to begin their cooing, a faint horn echoed through the stone halls. Not urgent, not loud, just enough to rouse the sleeping fighters. Marcus blinked his eyes open. The straw mattress beneath him creaked slightly as he sat up. Across the room, a few others stirred in silence. No groans, no complaints, just the rustle of woolen blankets and the soft thud of bare feet touching cool stone floors. The drill at dawn was not a punishment, it was tradition, a rhythm of discipline that shaped muscle, mind, and reaction. It was a dance they all knew, even in their dreams. The dressing was done quietly. Tunics were pulled over shoulders, belts fastened, sandals laced. Most left their weapons on their racks for now. The early session required only their bodies, raw strength, focus, and endurance. Outside, the courtyard waited beneath a low mist. The first amber light of the day had not yet broken, but the training ground was already alive in its stillness. Sand stretched across the square, raked and ready. Wooden practice poles, known as palace, stood like silent sentinels, worn smooth by years of strikes. The doctor, their veteran instructor, stood near the edge, arms folded. He nodded once. Form up. No shouting. No ceremony. No ceremony? The gladiators fell into line. Marcus found his place, eyes ahead, spine straight. The familiar tightness of early morning muscles pulled at his shoulders, but he welcomed it. It was the sign of life, of movement, of purpose. They began with stretches, slow and deliberate, arms outstretched toward the horizon, legs bent into deep lunges, necks rolled gently to shake out sleep. Even warriors needed softness before steel. Then the real work began. With silent precision, they moved into footwork drills. Sidestep, lunge, step, lunge, back, pivot. Each movement timed to the breath, as if choreographed to an unseen rhythm. Marcus focused on the sound of his own breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. It calmed his heartbeat, focused his mind. The sun hadn't yet risen, but sweat was already forming along his temples. After the footwork came shadow sparring. Without swords or armor, the men moved through imaginary battles, striking the air, ducking invisible blows, parrying shadows. To an outsider, it may have looked like a dance, and perhaps it was. But to the men, each motion was survival practiced in silence. 100 repetitions bred instincts faster than thought. Marcus's arms carved the air in fluid arcs, his feet shifting across the sand. His mind drifted, not away but inward, toward memory, toward clarity. Each imagined opponent became a reflection of himself. His fear, his pride, his doubt. He struck not to destroy, but to understand. When the doctor barked the next command, they moved to the palace. Each man claimed a post, wooden, worn, unyielding, and began the rhythmic thud of training strikes. Right slash, left thrust, overhead swing. The sound filled the courtyard like distant drums. The repetition, the resistance of wood, the calluses forming on palms, it was as grounding as prayer. The mist began to lift. A golden hue brushed the eastern sky. The doctor moved between them silently, adjusting postures, correcting grips. His approval came only in small nods and rare quiet praise. Good balance, clean cut, faster next time. But even the smallest approval felt like a laurel wreath. By now the sweat had soaked through their tunics. Breath came heavier, muscles trembled from the constant tension, and still they moved. Because this was the secret of the drill at dawn. It wasn't just to prepare for the arena. It was to remind them who they were before the roar of the crowd, before the clang of swords, before the blood. They were men of focus, of ritual, of control. As the sun finally breached the rooftops, washing the courtyard in honeyed light, the doctor raised his hand. Enough. Silence returned, heavy with exhaustion and peace. One by one, the men stepped back from their posts, sweat tracing paths down their brows. No cheers, no celebration, just the quiet satisfaction of discipline honored. Marcus took a deep breath, hands resting on his hips. The sting in his shoulders would linger all day, but it was a familiar ache, a good ache. Somewhere nearby, a bird finally sang, and the city began to stir. But for the men of the ludus, their day had already begun in sweat, sand, and silence. The midday sun hung high over Rome, casting long golden shadows between marble columns and tiled rooftops. The streets were alive with a kind of quiet tension, an anticipatory hum that buzzed beneath the surface of clinking cups and market calls. It was fight day. In the ludus, the mood had shifted. Gone was the tranquil rhythm of morning drills. Now came the final preparations, the rituals, the armor, the silence before the storm. Marcus sat alone in the small stone dressing room, staring at the armor laid out before him. Bronze greaves, leather straps, a heavy belt, and the curved helm with a visor like a beast's snarling face. To some, it was a costume. To Marcus, it was a second skin. He took a slow breath. The air was thick with olive oil. The air was thick with olive oil. A servant entered quietly, hands trembling slightly as he offered the gladiator a final sip of watered wine. Marcus accepted it without a word, his mind already in the arena. Outside, the distant roar of the crowd swelled like the ocean, a wave crashing against the ancient stones of the Colosseum. "50,000 voices strong. When he finally rose, the weight of the armor grounded him, anchoring him to the earth. The leather straps dug gently into his shoulders, and the bronze plate pressed against his chest like a steady hand. The hallway to the Colosseum was dim, lit only by torches placed in intervals along the curved stone. The sound of footsteps echoed. Other gladiators moved like shadows around him, some whispering prayers, others silent as tombs. Then came the gate. The wooden door groaned open slowly, revealing a blinding shaft of light. Marcus squinted as he stepped forward, the sunlight catching his helm and turning it gold. The warmth hit his face, and then he heard it clearly. The crowd. Thousands of people in tiered marble seating, cheering, jeering, tossing laurel wreaths and figs, waving handkerchiefs from noble balconies. Senators in fine tunics, citizens with wide eyes, children hoisted onto shoulders. The Colosseum was alive, a breathing thing, ancient and sacred. The arena floor was a ring of golden sand, smooth and level, surrounded by high walls. Beneath that sand, Marcus knew, were trapdoors, lifts and corridors where beasts and men waited. Across the ring, another gladiator stepped forward, tall, broad, clad in dark armor that gleamed like obsidian. A murmuring ripple passed through the crowd. He was known, a champion, and Marcus would face him. But in that moment, Marcus did not feel fear, only focus. The editor, the official who presided over the games, raised his hand. Horns blared. The match was beginning. There were no opening speeches, no introductions. The crowd didn't need them. The two men circled. Marcus felt the sand beneath his sandals, warm and familiar. He kept his shield high, his sword loose in hand, his breathing steady. First clash was sudden and sharp. Steel met steel in a flash of sunlight and grit. The force of it vibrated through Marcus's bones. He stepped back, then forward again, feeling the dance begin. Every fight was different. Some were wild and fast, others patient and tactical. This one was cautious at first, both men testing, measuring. Then, as the crowd grew louder, the tempo quickened. Marcus ducked a wide swing, rolled in the sand, came up slashing low. He heard the audience gasp, then cheer. Not for him, not for the other, but for the story. To them, it was theatre. To Marcus, it was life. Time stretched in strange ways. A minute felt like an hour. Every second a decision. Every breath a risk. He lost his shield, caught a glancing blow to his thigh, but he kept moving, remembering the morning drills, the balance, the breath. And then, in a swift twist of fate, he landed a clean strike across the other side. The crowd erupted. The thawed, other man staggered. Marcus stepped back, waiting, but the editor raised his hand again. The match was over. There would be no death today. The defeated man had earned his reprieve. And Marcus, he had earned the crowd's applause. He stood there, in the golden ring, chest heaving, armor smeared with sand, sword hanging loosely at his side. The noise poured over him like a wave. Somewhere in the crowd, a boy shouted his name. It was strange, he thought, to be celebrated for survival, to be loved for fighting, to be remembered for not dying. He bowed slowly, a small nod toward the senators, the citizens, the sun. Then he turned and walked back through the gate, into the quiet, the clang of swords, the roar of the crowd, the blinding sun. All of it slowly faded behind him as Marcus stepped back into the dim corridors beneath the Colosseum. Stone walls muffled the fading cheers. The cool air wrapped around his sweat-slicked skin like a damp cloth. Each footstep echoed with the weight of exhaustion. He was not limping, but the wound on his thigh throbbed. The town constable beginning his rounds. A rooster crows in the distance. The day has begun. Hot and deep beneath the leather wrap, his sword hand trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from adrenaline that now had nowhere to go. The battle was over. The body, finally, began to speak. Two attendants waited near the barracks with basins of warm water and strips of linen. One nodded silently, motioning toward a wooden bench. Marcus sat with a sigh, not one of pain, but of release. The kind of breath only taken once the danger has passed. He leaned back against the cold stone wall as the attendants carefully removed his armor, piece by piece, their fingers quick and practiced. Their fingers quick and practiced. Bronze greaves clanked gently to the floor. The leather cuirass peeled away, revealing a web of old scars across his shoulders and ribs. His skin was a map of stories. Some told, most forgotten. The young boy attending him, barely old enough to shave, dabbed the thigh wound with wine. Marcus barely flinched, though the boy winced on his behalf. "You'll walk tomorrow," the older man murmured as he wrapped the leg in clean linen. Marcus gave a tired nod. Beside him, another gladiator, older, grey at the temples, groaned as his dislocated shoulder was popped back into place. There were no cries, no complaints, only the silence of men who understood what it meant to hurt for honor. When the cleaning was done and the wrap secured, Marcus made his way to the small communal chamber where a quiet meal waited. A loaf of barley bread, a bowl of lentils, and, beside it, a single cup of watered wine. He sat down slowly, the bench hard beneath him. the scent of crushed garlic and herbs hanging in the air. Across from him sat Gaius, his training companion, nursing a cracked rib. "No teeth knocked out?" Gaius asked with a crooked grin. "Not today," Marcus replied, tearing a piece of bread. "But ask me after tomorrow's drills." The two men shared a quiet chuckle, the kind that didn't need volume to carry meaning. Outside the small window, the Roman sky was turning to gold. The noises of the Colosseum faded into birdsong and the faint sound of horse hooves on distant cobblestones. The city never slept, but in this little corner of it, time slowed. Marcus sipped his wine. Not enough to numb, just enough to ease. The bitterness reminded him he was alive. The wine, diluted as it was, held a kind of sacredness. It had followed him through every phase of his life, from soldiers' rations to celebratory toasts to quiet sips after surviving one more fight. He thought of the vineyards beyond the Tiber, the hands that had picked. The grapes crushed them, stored the barrels. It was strange to think that something so simple, wine and bread, could feel like peace. A servant passed by with an oil lamp, lighting the room with a soft glow. Shadows danced along the stone walls, casting long silhouettes of armor hung on pegs and cloaks folded neatly beside them. Marcus leaned back again, letting his head rest against the cool wall. The pain in his thigh pulsed gently in rhythm with his heartbeat. Not sharp, just present. This was a different kind of battle now. The battle of healing. Across the room, a cross or a drinking song with the edge softened by memory. The air was filled with a quiet kind of reverence, not for gods or glory, but for endurance. In the ludus, survival was not a triumph shouted from rooftops. It was a slow, steady breath at the end of the day, a shared look over a meal, a moment of silence where nothing hurt quite as much. Marcus reached for the last bite of bread. As he chewed, he closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. He did not think of tomorrow. Not yet. Tonight, there was only this, wounds, and wine. Night in the ludus was a strange thing. It did not bring the silence of peace, but the hush of watchfulness, a momentary pause between yesterday's fight and tomorrow's test. The city of Rome, always pulsing and awake, grew quieter as the stars blinked over terracotta roofs and marble columns. Within the walls of the Gladiator barracks, torchlight flickered against the worn stone, casting long shadows that stretched across the sleeping quarters. Most of the men were already wrapped in cloaks, their bodies still and curled like commas on straw-stuffed pallets. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, herbs and old oil, but Marcus could not sleep. He stood alone in the small courtyard that bordered the cells, a place lined with columns and a single olive tree that had long since stopped bearing fruit. In the center, a stone altar to Mars, god of war, stood vigil, its surface stained with old offerings, ashes, charred feathers, and drops of wine long soaked into. The stone, Marcus knelt before it. He did not pray with words. He never had. His offering tonight was the quiet of his breath, the heat in his limbs, the ache in his leg that pulsed beneath its fresh bandage. These were things Mars would understand. Above him, the stars swirled gently, veiled behind thin Roman clouds. The moon hung low and full. silver, like a gladius in the sky. He remembered what the Lannister had said earlier that evening before the men were dismissed to rest. Tomorrow brings nobles. The seats closest to the arena will be full of silk and coin. Impress them. Marcus was not fighting for favor. He never had, but he understood the game. Every strike in the arena was a message to the nobles, to the emperor, to the gods. Still kneeling, he traced a line down his chest with 2 fingers, the sign of Mars, and whispered a name, not his own, Lucius, his brother in arms, slain 3 moons ago in the sand of the Flavian amphitheater. A mistake in timing, a strike too slow, a crowd too silent at the end. Marcus still dreamed of that moment, not the death, but the stillness after, the heavy final breath. Tonight, the sky bore witness to it all. He stood slowly, his body stiff from the day's exertion. The linen wrap on his thigh held firm. His fingers brushed against the stone altar one last time before stepping back beneath the colonnade. The oil lamps lining the corridor burned low, their flames dancing in rhythm with his thoughts. He walked slowly, taking in the rhythm of the night. A rustle to his left. Gaius again, sitting against a column, polishing the edge of his blade by moonlight. "You should sleep," Marcus said. "So should you," Gaius replied, not looking up. "But I won't tell Mars if you don't." Marcus smirked and sat beside him. They said nothing for a while. Just listened to the chirp of night insects, the distant clatter of a late-night cart on a Roman street, the snoring of some fellow gladiator behind them. All of Rome existed in that hum, still breathing, still watching. After a time, Gaius said quietly, "Do you think they remember us? The crowd? Once they've gone home?" Marcus thought about the girl who had cheered earlier, her hand clutching the railing, her eyes wide with excitement. He thought of the wine-drunk senators, the scribes recording results, the flower petals tossed by veiled noblewomen. "They remember the fight," he said, "not the fighter." Gaius nodded, then shrugged. Better than not being remembered at all. They sat until the lamp beside them sputtered. Gaius rose, muttering something about getting a bit of sleep while he could. Marcus stayed. Alone once more, he tilted his head toward the stars. A breeze stirred his hair and the folds of his tunic. In the distance, the Colosseum loomed, its great arches silhouetted against the starlit horizon. A temple to violence, a cradle of glory, a tomb of names, lost to time. Tomorrow he would enter again, but tonight belonged to the watchers, the wakeful, the wounded, the ones who saw Mars not as a god of victory, but as a keeper of quiet oaths made in the dark. He stood slowly and returned to his cell. One more breath, one more night, one more watch beneath the eye of Mars. The sun rose like a god of its own, blinding gold, merciless. It spilled across the stone of the Colosseum, warming its high arches and cold marble statues. 1,000 footsteps echoed along its corridors. Vendors shouted, nobles laughed, and commoners poured into the stands. The smell of roasted meat, sweat, and anticipation thickened the air. In the underground staging chamber, Marcus waited. Leather straps tightened around his forearm. His gladius had been sharpened twice. He could hear the crowd already, like waves hitting the shore. He did not look at them, not yet. Instead, he thought of Laurel, not the crown, not the woven leaves handed to champions in ceremonial parades, but the trees. The ones he passed in his youth outside Capua. Quiet, resilient, green even in drought. He was one of them. Gaius clapped him on the back. "We don't die today." He grinned, teeth white against blood-colored paint smeared on his cheek. "Not today," Marcus replied. The gate creaked. The wooden door, studded with iron bolts, rose slowly. Beyond it, the sunlit sand, the arena. Cheers thundered down like an avalanche. The smell hit first: dust, heat, and the faint metallic ghost of old blood. The sand was stained in places, raked clean in others. Bits of armor shimmered beneath the surface like buried bones. Marcus stepped out. The light blinded him for a moment. His body tensed, reading the space, scanning for his opponent. A murmur passed through the crowd as the second gate opened. Opposite him stood a hulking man in scale armor, half Gaul, judging by the war paint and axe. The man bared his teeth like a wolf. Marcus noted the limp in his right leg. The Lannister's voice echoed from above. "Honored guests of Rome, behold our sons of Mars. Let the gods decide their fate." The trumpet sounded. Everything fell away. The crowd, the nobles, the emperor's gaze. All gone. There was only the man before him, the sun, the sand, the blade. The Gaul charged, raising his axe in a roar. Marcus sidestepped, cutting low. The axe scraped past his shoulder. He spun, slashing across the man's flank. Blood sprayed, hot and fast. Cheers roared. The Gaul staggered, swung again. This time Marcus met him with steel, their weapons locked. The Gaul grinned, pressed forward. Marcus dropped, ducked, rolled, came up behind him. One thrust. The blade slid under the ribs, precise and practiced. The Gaul fell to one knee, gasping. The arena went still. Marcus looked up. All eyes were on him. From the drunken merchant in the nosebleeds to the senator clutching his wife's hand. Even the emperor, seated beneath a red canopy, leaned forward. Marcus waited. The Gaul groaned, tried to rise, and then a hand. The emperor raised his palm, then turned his thumb sideways. Not down, not up. Mercy, a rare gift. Marcus lowered his blade. The Gaul slumped, alive but broken. A moment later, the medics rushed in. The crowd cheered again, this time louder. Horns blared. Flowers rained down like summer hail. Marcus did not smile. Victory was not joy. It was survival. He turned slowly, facing the crowd, lifting his gladius in salute. The cheers swelled to a roar. Someone shouted his name. He did not know how many times he had heard it, or if he ever would again. Back in the staging room, Gaius was waiting, eyes wide. By the gods, Marcus. You had him dancing like a fish on the hook. Marcus only nodded. His shoulder burned where the axe had grazed him. The Lannister entered with a grin. You would eat well tonight, my son of Mars. Marcus said nothing. Later that evening, in the dim light of the barracks, a young boy brought a parcel wrapped in cloth. Inside, a small crown of laurel leaves, a token. Symbolic. It would wither by morning. Marcus held it in his hands for a long time. He thought of Capua, of Lucius, of the oath he had whispered to Mars, and then he placed the laurel crown on the altar. A gift not for himself, but for every fighter who never made it home. That night, the ludus was silent. No boasting, no laughter, only the soft whisper of wind through the barrack windows and the creak of bunk beds under weary bones. Marcus lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling. Victory meant he would live to fight again. But how many more days? How many more laurel crowns? As he closed his eyes, the arena echoed in his ears, cheers fading like the surf on a distant shore. And then, silence.